Is the Nikon D850 still a great choice in 2022? Well, I'm going to answer that question in this video. In fact, one of the most common questions that I'm getting asked is, Ben, why are you still shooting with a DSLR when the new Z series has come out and so many people are using it? Well, I want to talk about why I think the D850 is still an amazing choice of camera for you in 2022, particularly if you're into landscape photography, which I am. This camera came out in 2017, so I grabbed it as soon as it came out. I've been shooting Nikon all my life pretty much, and from film all the way through the digital. My first digital camera was a D70, I think it was a Nikon, or maybe a D80, and then I had a D300, a D700, a D800, a D810, and then the D850, and I had my D810 as a backup. So I've had this camera for 5 years, and even after 5 years on the market, I think this camera is still hard to beat, really hard to beat. And I'm going to talk a bit about some of the things that I think it does really well and why I think that as a landscape photographer, it's a great choice for you in 2022. Now, when I look at the EXIF data on my Lightroom catalog of all the images that I've taken with this camera, 95% of them have been with this lens. So I reckon that this lens and camera combo is like an unstoppable force when it comes to landscape photography. Now, this is the 14 to 24mm f2.8 lens, cracking lens, minimal distortion, really sharp images, and just does a great job. I find that it's my favorite lens of all time, and it's a workhorse. I've bashed it about, I've taken it out. In fact, this is my second one. I had one stolen, but this one, it's just a workhorse. It's absolutely fantastic lens and does a great job. And the two of these paired together, I think, is just like a landscape photographer's dream. So if you're thinking about getting one of these cameras, try and get one with the 14 to 24mm lens if you don't already have one. Now, why do I think this camera is such a good buy in 2022? Well, you could go to the mirrorless system, there's no doubt about it. And if you look at what's going on with camera manufacturers right now, they're not making DSLRs anymore. There's no doubt about that. The future is definitely mirrorless, and at some point, you're going to have to make the transition. But I don't think you can beat this camera value for money right now. If you are investing into mirrorless for the first time, then yes, you can get a lens adapter, but realistically, you're going to want to get the lenses that are native to that system, which means selling all of your old camera gear and buying into the mirrorless sort of ecosystem. And that's going to cost you a fair whack of money, there's no doubt about that. But it also means that because a lot of early adopters are doing that, there's a lot of people that get FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, and they want to grab that new gear. They're selling their old DSLR gear. And the secondhand market is flooded with DSLRs, F-mount series lenses, and you know what? Because there's such a supply or an oversupply and not a huge demand for it, the prices are coming down. So you can pick up one of these for around about 1,700 Aussie dollars. I've seen them go a little bit lower than that, but I'd say 1,700, 1,750 is probably a real reasonable amount. I'd say in the US probably for about 1,500 US, maybe less. So you can definitely grab these things for a bargain price now. I paid nearly $5,000 for this, I think, when it came out. I think it was $4,850 when they were brand new 5 years ago. Even brand new, I saw these on Amazon just before I hit record, and they got them for $2,700, so Australian. So there's definitely plenty of options out there, pre-owned, so you still get a warranty if you're worried about that. All you need to do is just look for a camera that has, probably less than 50,000 on the shutter count, and you'll be sweet. This one's got about 50,000 on it. I've got a friend with one with 275,000 shots, and it's still going strong. I think it's rated to 200,000, so you don't want to go too crazy. But anything under 50,000, probably under 30,000, and there's lots of them out there because a lot of people don't use their camera very much. You'll pick up a bargain. So let's talk about some of the things that I love about this camera and what I've learned after shooting with it for 5 years. First of all, the dynamic range. When I first shot with this camera, I've got to say that I was amazed at the dynamic range. I was shooting previously with a D810, which had a very big sensor size as well. So you would think that it wouldn't be that different, but this one, for some reason, just managed to capture the dynamic range so much better. Now, for those of you that know my past, I was a very mad keen HDR photographer. In fact, that's what got me into landscape photography back in about 2010 was HDR. And HDR is the process of taking multiple exposures, different exposure values, and blending them together to be able to capture all of the dynamic range of a scene. Well, with this camera, I've hardly done it. I do still do it from time to time, but I typically just expose for the highlights. And I shoot mostly at sunset and sunrise, as a lot of landscape photographers do. And so I will shoot at -2, sometimes up to -3 exposure value on the exposure comp, and I'll still be able to pull the shadows up in my post-production. So the dynamic range on this is almost unbelievable. That leads me then to image quality. That was the other thing. When I first pulled that first raw image into Lightroom and I looked at the detail, I was like, man, how good is this? It was just, it floored me, to be honest with you. It was a great image quality, and still to this day, I still am amazed when I process an image and go, my gosh, how good does that look? Now, I know that's not just the camera, you know, when it comes to sharpness and color and composition, there's a lot of different factors, but the details that this thing captures, the image quality is second to none. It's still one of the best sensors on the market, regardless of whether or not it's got a mirror in there that moves up and down. This still has, you know, a real premium sensor in there, and there's no reason why you wouldn't consider this up there with the best of them today. I still think it's one of the best cameras for landscape photographers. The other thing I think is really good is the autofocus. So one of the things happened to me as I've got older is I've got to wear these short lookers these days, and it means that I'm finding it harder to know whether or not I'm in focus unless I use the optical viewfinder, which I rarely use. I have the shutter closed on that most of the time, and I use the live view. And I just rely on the autofocus. I just switch the camera's autofocus on and I use the touchscreen on the back. I find a point of contrast, click on it, and just, I know it's focused. It's never ever let me down. It's an amazing autofocus system. So not only with that, with macro, with wildlife, I've never had a problem with moving subjects. It just has a good autofocus system. So, you know, if you're thinking about you know, using this camera for something besides landscape photography, it's great for that. It's a good all-rounder. It's probably one of the other good things about this particular camera. ISO performance. You know, if I think back about previous digital SLRs that I've had, as soon as you go above probably 800 ISO, you're starting to see a fair bit of noise in your image. This one here, I can shoot pretty comfortably up to 1600 ISO, maybe 3200 depending on the scene. I've done plenty of astrophotography at that sort of level. Even up to 6400, it's still very usable. So, you know, you've got an ISO capability in this that allows you to speed up the shutter speed if you want to make things, you know, move a bit faster. If you're doing night photography, the high ISO on this is really good. You know, it allows you to be able to post-process. And now I use Topaz denoise. I find that works well, and it will remove most of the noise from any image I shoot up to about ISO 3200. So, you know, if you're looking for a camera that has that capability, it definitely has that. I mentioned before the autofocus being great as an all-rounder, but this camera is adaptable. It will allow you to shoot anything. I love my macro. I've got my macro lens. I love my wildlife to some extent as well. I've got the 200 to 500 lens, works really well with that. So it is very adaptable, and I've got the customized setup in the back, so I can just switch between my customization A, B, and C. I've got it set up, and I've got landscape, macro, and wildlife set up separately. So I just switch between each one, and it changes, you know, how the camera operates completely, my focusing, all the different settings. So, you know, you can set this up so you know, it's ready for action no matter what it is that you're doing. And I think that's another great thing about this camera. I think it's also a perfect camera for people of all levels. So if you're just a beginner, if you feel a little bit overwhelmed, the good thing with this camera is you can just sort of set it and forget it. I shoot pretty much everything on aperture priority and let the camera take care of the rest. I manually adjust the ISO, but the rest of it, I just let it adjust the shutter speed, and I do that with the matrix metering on most of the time. I think if you're a beginner also, I think it's actually good to have most of your controls on the outside of the camera. I think too many cameras these days have a lot of their controls hidden away in the menus because it's expensive to make buttons and all these external, you know, there's a lot of circuitry, a lot of manufacturing that goes into that. So, you know, the cheaper cameras typically, or lower level cameras typically don't have all the external buttons like for bracketing, ISO, modes, etc. Even the aperture and shutter speed to have the two wheels on here. You got a lot more at your fingertips when you use a DSLR of this level. So I would really consider that. You know, if you're going to buy a similar priced brand new mirrorless, you could probably get a second-hand DSLR for the same money, and it'll make it easier for you to learn photography. So, you know, they're great. Unless you go with one of like the Fuji X series ones, they're really good with the way that they have their dials on the outside predominantly. But that's one of the things that I love about it. I think it's just great. And to that end, it feels good in the hands too. Like, it's a good solid camera, nice big grip, feels really good to hold, feels good to use, nicely balanced. I think, you know, as far as a DSLR, well, as a camera goes, you know, you're going to feel really comfortable with that. A couple of the other little things that I think are really cool, the backlighting, when they went to the D850, they included backlighting on the back buttons. Now, being a landscape photographer, we shoot a lot in the dark, so, you know, it sounds like something that's silly, because you could just wear a headlamp or, you know, use a light on your phone. But the backlighting is really good. I mean, I memorize where my buttons are most of the time, but, you know, just with a flick of the switch to the right, it turns all the lighting on, and including the buttons on the back, so it helps you with that as well. And the weather sealing as well. You know, I've had this thing for 5 years. I've done seascapes. I've had it out in the rain. I've had it in the snow. I've had it in the sand. I've had it in the mud. I've even rinsed this bad boy off in my kitchen sink after it got covered in salt water one day when I was shooting a seascape, and it's still going strong. Not an issue, not one single issue. So, you know, you can't fault the weather sealing on this camera. I think, you know, that's something that you know, is very important to me. I would never buy a camera that didn't have weather sealing. Never. Not as a landscape photographer. Just wouldn't. The other thing it's got is the dual card slots. I know that's important to a lot of people. Not something that I actually use, but definitely something that you can you know, bank on being there if you need it. If it's important to you, it does have the dual card slots. So to me, it's just a workhorse. It's tough. It's an all-rounder. It just keeps going. Rated to 200,000 in its shutter. Will I change to mirrorless? Yes, I will. I think most photographers will have to eventually. My D850 will end up on the second-hand market, I'd say, in the next 12 months, because I'd say the Z8 will come out. When the Z8 comes out, that should be enough to draw me across to the mirrorless camp. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe I won't take the first one, although I'm assuming a lot of the technology from the Z9 will be in the Z8. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. We'll see what happens. We'll see what's in store for us. Please, Nikon, if we can do that. So a few tips for if you're going to buy a second-hand one, because I think that's the best way, right? If you're going to get the best value for money, grab yourself a second-hand one. My first tip would be, you know, look for something with the 10,000 to 30,000 shutter actuations. There is a way of checking that, and so you can ask a seller to give you that data if you need it. And there is a lot of cameras that are in that range because they just haven't been used that much. Now, if you can imagine 2,000 photos a year, a lot of people wouldn't even take that. So you might find one with less than 10,000 shutter actuations. Now, this one is rated to 200,000 in the shutter count. I've got a friend that's got one that's got 275,000 and never had a problem. So, you know, they do last a long time if they're looked after. So, but having said that, I've also heard of people having them fail at 30,000. So you do need to be careful because I'm sure that would not be a cheap thing to fix. The second thing is make sure you go and inspect it in person if you can. I've seen a few people dudded buying stuff online and it not arriving in the condition that it was described, myself included. I bought this lens secondhand of a bloke in Melbourne in Gumtree, and I had to get a $750 repair done to it. So, you know, you just need to be careful. I would never do that again. I just trusted the guy. He was on a buy, swap, sell page that I was on as well. And you feel like you can trust people, but you just can't. So, you know, it did work, but it had a problem. It had been dropped and a few things were out of alignment. So, you know, you just need to know if you're buying secondhand, I would inspect it in person if you could. If you can't, set up a Zoom call. You know, the one thing the last couple of years did was taught us all how to use Zoom. Set up a Zoom call, get on there and get them to show you it working, show you previews, and just, you know, maybe even get them to give you some sort of you know, written guarantee. I don't know. If you can get a friend to go around and pick it up, get them to pick it up. I think that's the best thing. The other thing is you can look at their online profile as well, look through their Facebook page, their Instagram. You can sort of get a bit of a picture for how they treated their gear, where they went, did they take it everywhere? You know, you sometimes, not everyone's online, but you certainly can help. The other thing I would suggest is try and find something with some accessories because, you know, whilst I said that they're very cheap at the moment compared to what they were new, the other bonus you get is a lot of people will throw in accessories. Things like this L bracket, for example, you know, that's a $150 L bracket if you were to buy it separately. Things like remotes, spare batteries, could be, you know, adaptable grips. It could be even come with a lens, camera straps. Who knows, right? There's just so many different accessories out there that you might find that you'll find one that's got stacks of different accessories as well. So there you go. So there's my thoughts on the Nikon D850. I still love her. She's still my baby. We've done a lot of work together and I think we're going to do a lot more before I switch over to mirrorless. And I think it's a great camera. I really do. So if you're in the market to upgrade, in particular if you've already got a Nikon DSLR and you've already got some F-mount lenses, then just take the plunge. Find yourself a good second-hand D850 and you won't regret it. Trust me.